My guest is Ross Dellenger. He is with Yahoo Sports. He's an award-winning reporter covering college sports, does such a great job. You can follow him on X at Ross Dellenger. Ross, thanks for joining me on Sports Business Radio. How are you?
Good to join.
You do such a great job covering the college landscape, and it seems like it gets more complex every day. We had Cody Campbell on a few weeks ago and talked about the Protect College Sports Act. But for those who aren't familiar with that, you spent a lot of time covering this. Can you give us like the Reader's Digest version of what is the Protect College Sports Act and why is it so important?
Well, yeah, the Protect College Sports Act sort of is meant to regulate college athletics. Specifically, I think the biggest concepts are around athlete compensation and movement. So it would reestablish the NCAA's one-time transfer limitation where a player can move once and then after that would have to sit out a year. So that's number one. Number two, it creates or establishes a 5-year eligibility window for athletes and bans pro players for coming back to play in college. And it puts more of a harder cap on the athlete compensation, the revenue share cap. It establishes a age of registry or certification process as well, which is important. It does some other things, but those are the main things. And the Congress, or at least according to the act, it gives the NCAA and the conferences a congressional antitrust exemption for those things only, basically. So it's not a broad antitrust exemption. It is more of like Congress saying, here are the rules, and you can enforce these rules only with legal protection. So that's kind of the gist. I think most people believe it is important to answer your second question because of the sort of unruly, sort of rudderless situation that college sports finds itself in with free movement where players can transfer whenever they want, in an athlete revenue share cap that is not really strictly enforced, and in an eligibility standard that's certainly not strictly enforced. We're seeing right now that the eligibility standard is at the mercy of the courts in state courts and judges. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. And now it has, it obviously failed last week. And it's got sort of a murky, I would say, next few weeks.
What happens if this act doesn't pass?
Well, I think that the conferences, specifically the major power conferences, will probably break away from the NCAA from a governance perspective and create their own rules and their own enforcement body. And the idea around that is that they would evade antitrust scrutiny because they're smaller group, they can govern a smaller group of programs, and that there'll be fewer legal challenges. That's the theory, at least. The one of the problems with the NCAA is it's so big, over 350 schools alone in Division I, and it certainly has market power where it's susceptible to legal challenges. So the idea is the SEC say will govern itself by creating its own rules of enforcement and only govern its 16 programs, and it won't be subject to antitrust scrutiny. That is probably the next step of what will happen if the bill doesn't advance. And I think the biggest question is, when you break away from a governance concept, does it mean later on a full competitive breakaway from the NCAA, which would mean pulling out of the college football playoff, the NCAA tournament, and other NCAA championships?
Wow. So, I mean, college sports as we know it could look very, very different in the next few years. When I had Cody on, one of the things he seems passionate about is with the Protect College Sports Act, you're really trying to protect women's sports and Olympic sports. So if this act doesn't pass and you have conferences like forming their own entity away from the NCAA, what happens to women's sports and Olympic sports? I would think it's not a great future for them.
Well, right now we're the most easiest way to explain an athletic department's revenue situation is that pretty much every sport except for football, and maybe men's basketball, and in some very small places, baseball loses money. And the money that's made through football and men's basketball, the revenue is often used to fund the other sports. Well, because of the revenue share now with athletes, that money is being used to pay athletes of those sports mainly. So that leaves a hole in the budgets of athletic departments to fund Olympic sports. Now, there's another argument to this of that, you know, schools should not be paying their coaches, football coaches so much, their administrators so much. They should be spending so much on facilities and all this stuff and renovations. Um, and so that is certainly an argument to be made, but it's a competitive market, and you have to win in football. And I think that's what we're seeing is a competitive market where the resources are going to the sport that sort of drives the athletic department and the university to an extent, and that leaves everything else acceptable to not being necessarily cut. You hear a lot of like, oh, this sport's eliminated, that sport. I'll be honest, there's actually not been a lot of sports eliminated. When you look at all of the sports in Division One, I think it's around like 80 or 90. Most of those outside of the power conferences. Um, but what is happening is a defunding of Olympic sports, and just a diminishing of resources to pump through back into football and men's basketball and other revenue producing sports.
So it looks like the next time that Congress could get together on this September 14th, I think is what you've written. Give us a timeline of like what happens next with Protect College Sports Act. And then, when could it get passed? And then if it doesn't get passed, then we're dealing with what you've outlined so far in this conversation.
Yeah, they return September 14th, so there's a 5 week break that the Senate will have. This bill is a Senate bill. If it passes the Senate, it has to go to the House, then it has to be signed by the president. The House will likely offer a lot of amendments. There'll be a lot of amendments before it even passes the Senate. We'll probably see that over the next few weeks. There'll be changes and modifications. There's a lot of hurdles left. Last Friday night, it really needed to pass the Senate before the break. A lot of people give it lower odds now, because there's just more time for critics to pull apart the bill and for sort of divisiveness to sort of linger. So I think that what you'll see is a really hard time getting this through the many chambers that it needs to get through. But it still might happen, and still might happen in the lame duck in November, December, the lame duck where after the elections, you might see a push to get the bill across. But it is going to be difficult. It's going to be a difficult task. So, but right now it is on the books to be voted on in the Senate on September 15th. And I think that you'll need to see some modifications for them to have the 60 plus votes they need. And really, Majority Leader John Thune, he wants really 70 plus because he wants to send it to the House with a large majority probably to pressure the House to get something done.
Not to get too far into the weeds with you, but what do you think those senators are looking for in order to pass this? Like, why would you oppose this at this point? What needs tweaking?
Well, there's a lot of amendments that have been filed. One amendment certainly involves transgender. It involves male athletes competing in women's sports. Another one involves the expansion provision. There's an anti-expansion provision in the bill that basically makes it more difficult for power conference teams to move to another power conference. So an ACC school going to an SEC school would have to basically sit out for a probationary period of 5 years as an independent before they could move. So there's a lot of lawmakers that represent states with schools that want to move, that want that provision changed. And you're just going to see a lot more, right? From the Democrat side, you're going to see more of a collective bargaining employment model that they believe should be added to the bill. So there's just a lot. The bill is real specific. It's real detailed. It gets into specifics, and it's not as uh, skinny of a bill as many wanted. And when each time you add something to a bill, I think it opens the door for more criticism.
What's your best guess as to what happens from here? I mean, like you said, September 15th, they get together. You've kind of outlined it's an uphill battle to get this passed, potentially. We've talked about conferences, those power conferences potentially breaking away. College football season's coming up, as you said. Like, this is the biggest time of the year for the college sports calendar. It's the biggest revenue driving sport in college sports. What happens now?
Yeah, again, I think, if there's no hope in the bill, I think you will see the self-governance model from the conference level continue to be explored. And it's probably again, it probably just like a step in the direction of sort of a more full, informal breaking apart of NCAA Division One. Right now NCAA Division One has something like 360 schools. You've got 137 in FBS. You've got another 100 or so in FCS. And then you got the basketball only schools, 60, 80, 90, something like that. Um, and I think what you're going to see is FBS, but maybe specifically the 70 power conference, four conferences, sort of just separate themselves more with a separate governance model and potentially a separate competitive model where they only play themselves, either within their conference or with each other. I think that feels like more of what we're heading toward.
If you're one of these schools, like I'm based in Oregon, if you're Oregon State or you're a Pac-12 school, what does this mean for you? I mean, if you're not going to be able to compete for a championship in really any of the biggest revenue driving sports, football or basketball, are you a club sport? Like, what does this mean for you? I would imagine, it has impacts on everything from raising money because people know that you're not competing for championships to recruiting to, getting coaches. I would think that, and I know that's happening a little bit already, but it seems like that would be a real big change.
You're talking about the like the Olympic sports or just the breaking away of competitive,
Breaking
basically
away.
the NCAA? Yeah,
If the Power
yeah,
Five conferences basically say we're going to become our own entity, we're doing our own thing. What does it mean for all the
yeah,
other colleges, like an Oregon State or a Pac-12
yeah.
school, who's like, well, I'm not one of those Power Five conference schools. What does this mean for me?
Well, they would have to create. It would be the group you're sort of referring to, right? Is the group of six, what they call it, the Sun Belt and the Pac-12 and the Mountain West and the Conference USA, American, the MAC. I think they would probably have to form. There's about 70 schools in that group or so. They'd have to form like an FCS. They have to form their own sort of division and potentially have their own championship. And many people think they should, or they should merge with FCS or something because the gaps financially are growing so much, and those gaps are only going to continue to grow because there's now a direct pay from schools to athletes that continually will grow the gap from a recruiting standpoint and a talent standpoint. So I think the group of six has long discussed having its own playoff. They don't necessarily want to go that route. And I'm talking about football specifically. Uh, they'd like to be still a part of the CFP. They get a lot of money from the CFP. They get $130 million from the CFP that they all split with one another. It's like roughly 2 million a school. So they'd be losing a lot of that. Can they make that up? Probably not. So that is part of an issue there. And then there's, of course, the threat of breaking apart the NCAA tournament, basketball tournament, which would be obviously a really, really big deal.
Yeah, I mean, didn't they just vote to expand? So now if you're like breaking it
Mhm.
apart, it's totally different. It just seems to me, Ross, like college sports has turned into like football's its own entity in college football playoff. Then you've got March Madness, which is run by the NCAA, totally separate from college football playoff. And then you've got women in Olympic sports. And it seems like they're three different companies, so to speak. They're just so different, but you're trying to, herd all of these athletes under one umbrella.
It is, yeah. It's the potentially breaking apart of the NCAA tournament is probably what many fear the most as being destructive to the current landscape of college athletics if that were to happen, because the NCAA tournament is kind of the glue that sort of holds everybody together. It's an incredibly popular event, and probably will continue to be popular. I think it's probably second or third in popularity and viewership, only to like the NFL playoffs and maybe some other professional playoffs. It's a pretty significant deal, and it's a $1 billion over $1 billion sort of revenue generator for the NCAA. It's really the only revenue generator for the NCAA. So if you don't have that, it's a problem financially for the association. So and that's been talked about, right? There's 6 more years or 5 more years of the contract that keeps everybody together. And when that contract ends, that'll be a very big time.
The question I get more than any other question from just listeners and fans is, what has happened to the NCAA? And, I know we've kind of addressed that here in this conversation, but, it used to be they had jurisdiction, they could enforce, and now they seem like a pretty rudderless organization. Look ahead a couple of years. Does the NCAA even exist? Certainly probably not in its current form, but does it even exist anymore?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not in its current form. I think we all have to remember that the NCAA is just a voluntary membership association, and the schools make the rules, and school administrators, presidents, athletic directors, even coaches sit on committees and make the rules. And the NCAA's job is really just to enforce the rules that they are met by that the membership makes, and to operate championships and sort of the academic eligibility component. That's it. And what's happened is, because college sports, especially at the highest level, has become such a big moneymaker, the courts and judges have determined that, at least at the highest level of major college football and men's basketball, the players should be paid, in that the NCAA should have freedom to move, and that the NCAA's rules, which are created by the membership, were prohibiting until a lot of these changes, that from happening. And so the NCAA's been subject to the antitrust and legal challenges that have sort of crumbled the amateurism rules and policies that the schools made. And by the way, many of these policies and these legal challenges were supported by the schools. And so the schools are suing their voluntary membership organization that they are a part of over rules that they created. And that's really the gist of what's happened. And it's happening because of a competitive advantage, because everybody wants a competitive advantage. And now the money's so big, the competitive advantage, the desire in sort of requirement to be competitive only raises. And so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that now with eligibility. We saw it with compensation for athletes and movement. It's a significant issue for the NCAA, and it's kind of what's brought it to its knees.
Ross, we've covered a lot in this conversation. You do a great job covering the college sports landscape. Before I let you go, is there anything else that we should be paying attention to? Is there anything else that you're covering that we should read about, that you're writing about? I'm just interested, again, you have such a good grasp on what's happening now and where things are going.
Yeah, well, I think everybody probably should be paying attention to the major conferences and their next move when it comes to this governance breakaway. I mean, that is a sort of a significant sort of situation that really could be very real and could happen potentially very quickly, like this fall. You know, a lot of readers love to read about the college football playoff, right, and the expansion of the college football playoff, but that's not going to matter if there is a competitive breakaway, which I don't necessarily think there will be, but I think there will be a governance breakaway potentially soon if this bill doesn't get passed. So that's kind of the next step.
And you think that could happen as soon as this fall?
I do. I would say by the end of the fall, that if the bill doesn't pass by the end of the fall, then there probably will be conferences that, from a governance perspective, are creating their own rules and their own enforcement mechanism.
And is this like Power Five collectively, or is this each conference on their
No,
own?
it would be each conference, and then the question becomes is if other conferences have different rules and enforce them differently, do you continue to play everybody competitively? That's sort of the big question.
What a mess. Ross Dellenger, Yahoo Sports. He does such a great job. Award-winning reporter covering college sports. You can follow him on X at Ross Dellenger. Ross, thanks for joining me on Sports Business Radio. Always appreciate it.
Yeah, it's going to be on.